When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all my children now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
This is John Eisenberg, author of Rocket Men, new book about black quarterbacks in pro football. You are listening to Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this next guest is a legend of the pen, or in these days, I'm dating myself saying pen. We could say keyboard, but he is a Baltimore-based author, retired sports columnist, and speaker. He is a man that has over 3,000 columns, won over 20 awards, and witnessed many historic sports achievements, such as Ripken's Ironman streak, Tiger Woods' barrier-busting Masters triumph, a famous Game 6 masterpiece by Michael Jordan against Utah in 1998. But back in September of 2023, since we did the changeover, his latest book, which is number 11, according to my fingers and toes when counting, was published, and that is Rocket Man, Black Quarterbacks Who Revolutionized pro football. Let's welcome John Eisenberg. John, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Right on, and Happy New Year, sir. Did you have a good holiday?
Very, very good holiday. Thank you. Hope everyone did. Mine was great.
Right on. So, obviously, 3 years apparently in the making. When did the idea click to do this book?
Well, it's a long story. I've written, as you were correct with your fingers and toes, it's my 11th book, and there's a race has been a thread through many of them. When I wrote about the early Dallas Cowboys and growing up in Dallas, I made sure that I spoke to the first generation of African Americans who played for the Dallas Cowboys in the 1960s. Very different experience they had than the white ones, the white players. So I always had that. And then I wrote columns for years at the Baltimore Sun. And, whenever you write about race, there was a strong reaction all over the landscape, some of it ugly, some of it interesting. So it's always been, if you're a public-facing writer, as I've been, it's always sort of in sports, the forefront of my thoughts. And I'm in Baltimore, as you said. Lamar Jackson landed here in 2018, and I was able, at that point, was actually writing columns for the Ravens digital media operation. So very up close and personal, was able to watch his experience. And he comes in and barely makes it he's barely in the first round. He's a draft pick and coming off a combine where a scout asked him if he was going to run the 40 because he'd be a good wide receiver. That's almost 100 years into the history of the NFL, and great black college quarterbacks are still experiencing stuff like that because of that sort of old racist ideology is the only way to put it. It's, were they smart enough and could they lead and all this nonsense. And so he's still experiencing that. And so it just really hit me that this is a story that, I felt like I wanted to bring it to light. I wanted to people to see what had happened all these years in this sport that we follow and love so much. And it just illuminate this story. And it really came out of all those issues, Lamar certainly being part of it.
Right on. So you mentioned about Lamar and the 40 and all that stuff during the combine. And if I remember this correctly, because I'm a Ravens fan at heart and an Orioles guy, even though I'm in Philadelphia, they wanted him to be a tight end, correct?
It was the Chargers. It was a scout for the Chargers who said to him, "Are you going to run a 40?" It was not a tight end. They thought he'd be a good wide receiver.
Okay.
And so he experienced that. Of course, Bill Polian, who's in the Hall of Fame, made some comments about maybe he'd be better at another position in the NFL. So there was a fair, and that he was a prominent guy on ESPN at that point. So there was quite a bit of that going on with Lamar. And, the second year in the league, he's MVP, and then looks like he's going to get another one this year. So a two-time MVP by the time he's a 6-year pro. So the whole dynamic of quarterback play in the NFL has changed. And, I think black quarterbacks have had a lot to do with that. And,
it's funny because when you think about it, try to think with logic. I'm 39 and going to be 40 in the summer, but we had guys growing up, such Warren Moon was at the peak of his career. You had a mobile quarterback like Randall Cunningham in Philadelphia. Yeah, and there was others that came along the way from that standpoint. Doug Williams was, around with Washington when I was a kid, won the Super Bowl, all that fun stuff. Was it a strike against you if you were a mobile quarterback, especially in that, I would say, first generation of mobile quarterbacks?
No question about it. That's a really good question. I mean, as I write in my book, it's a book about race, but it's also about football and sort of strategy of football and that position. I wanted to tell the story of how what the quarterback position was, what the NFL wanted, and how it came about. And for many years, exactly as you said, if you were mobile, that was a strike against you. I tell the story of the late 1960s, a guy that a lot of fans don't know about. His name is Eldridge Dickey. He's the first black quarterback picked. He was Oakland Raiders took him in the first round in 1968. He was out of Tennessee State, incredible talent. Never played a down in the NFL, but he was and he was just 5 decades ahead of his time. If the pocket, the Raiders wanted him in the pocket, and if he scrambled out of the pocket, if no one was open, the coaches went nuts. The offensive linemen went nuts. Nobody liked it. It was held against him that he would improvise and do what we consider today to be smart. Really, the only way to go when you're being pressured. So it was held against him. That's 1968, and really, it took decades later for. I mean, the prototypical NFL quarterback was, drop back, stay in the pocket, and throw the ball. And mobility was, it was a drop back game. And so finally it began to change in the late 80s and the 90s, I'd say. And of course, it was white quarterbacks for the most part with their mobility that had to prove it, like Steve Young, guys like that. Elway was mobile, but it was held against you for many years.
So when I think about all this, because there's a lot to ingest, you're dealing with over 100 years of material. What about research? Where do you begin? Not only are you talking the game, but you're talking race relations and everything. Yeah, there's so many moving parts in trying to tell this story. So where does one begin with the research and putting everything together?
Well, it was 3 years in the making, a lot of research. The first thing I needed to decide was who am I going to highlight in this story? How am I going to go about doing this? There's so many guys. And I love the research end of it. This was 100 years plus of material. And so I sort of narrowed it down to who are the guys that I wanted to highlight. It wasn't always obvious. I learned some things. I didn't really know the story of Sandy Stevens, who played at the University of Minnesota in the 1960, around then, led them to the Rose Bowl victory, and was drafted in the NFL draft, and was the first black quarterback to be a first-team All-American, never played in the NFL. And actually, it was his success that convinced Tony Dungy to go to Minnesota all those years later. And Tony was interesting to talk to about that. But so the research is, once you sort of decide who you want to highlight, and then it's really no different. You get into the archives, you read the old newspapers, you interview as many guys as you can, and not just the quarterbacks themselves, but people around them, or historians, or old coaches, scouts. Just as many people as you can. You bring as much information as you can. I don't write for a long time after I sign a contract to write a book. I do research and just dig into it. Online, there's stuff at the Hall of Fame Museum in Canton, Ohio. Just as much information as I can, and then I start to write.
So, speaking of that, talking to people, all the fun stuff, diving into things. And I was listening to other conversations and such, prepping for this. But apparently, James Harris, who was drafted by Buffalo, was a fun and enlightening conversation, being a great storyteller and telling his story and such. So what was it about James that really made you enjoy talking to him?
Well, I've known James Harris a little bit. Of course, he was really the first black starting quarterback, modern starting quarterback that a team wanted to start for them. It was the Rams in the mid-1970s. And he, as you said, had been drafted by Buffalo the year O.J. Simpson was drafted. And he'd had basically not much of a career till he got to the Rams. but yet he had been groomed to play for years by Eddie Robinson and Grambling. I just thought his story was incredible. He had been groomed by Eddie Robinson to be the first black starting quarterback, had sort of flunked out of the league, got a second chance, made the most of it. And then he got into front office work, and I knew Shaq. I'm in Baltimore, and Shaq worked for the Ravens. And so he's just a great storyteller. Even back then, I sort of was around him a little bit. And I was able to get in touch with him through Ozzie Newsome, the general manager of the team. And he is, he's elderly at this point, but such a vivid, he's from the South, and he comes out of that great Southern storytelling lineage. And
did you say it was like a fish telling of a fishing story? The fish was this big, but it,
right,
pretty accurate with the.
I asked him one question, and he talked for 45 minutes. I said, "Tell me about going up to Buffalo in 1969 and trying to make the Bills." And 45 minutes later, he tells me the story. He's coming out of all black school. He's going up. He's never really even been around white people. He said he just tells this unbelievable story. He's 8th on the depth chart. They put him up at the Y. They have him cleaning his teammates' cleats when he needs money. He told this story, and then he winds up winning the job, and he's the starter on the opening day, the opening game against Joe Namath and the Jets. It's such a story, and then he loses the job and barely plays for them again. But he told that story 45 minutes later. I said, Shaq, they call him Shaq as his nickname. I said, I could probably write a whole book about what you just told me. That your experience in Buffalo in the summer of 1969 is unbelievable, with all the OJs in there and all this stuff. So, he's just you can't top it as a storyteller, and certainly as the writer, I appreciate people that can spin a good tale.
Exactly, but it's I don't know if it's funny, ironic. There's so many different directions you can go, but you did mention about being drafted the same year with OJ, and OJ was treated like the second coming as a running back, knew he was going to start all that stuff. And James was like you said, put up at the Y, clean teammates' cleats for extra money, all that stuff. Why was there such a difference in how they were treated?
Pro football was a lot different then. There wasn't just this hyperventilating reporting on everything, and a lot of stuff went under the radar. And OJ, as you said, was royalty. I mean, he's coming to Buffalo, which it was not the bright lights big city, and they were so excited to have this incredible superstar there, and they just bent over backwards for him. And James, the guy, the black quarterback taken in the 8th round, and once you got below the first or second round, you were kind of a long shot to make it. And they played hardball with you, and he didn't have an agent. Eddie Robinson had to negotiate his contract. The sport is just different in every way, and these teams didn't have a lot of money. And so they were looking to cut costs, and they put up guys at the Y, and OJ got a suite because he was OJ. But they put up guys. If you were an 8th round draft pick, you were, good luck to you. He showed up without a contract. Pro football, you just can't emphasize enough how different it was, and so things like that could happen back then.
Yeah. But, you talk about some of the sad tales of the racism and stereotype and everything else throughout the history of the game, with not only football, but the quarterbacks, all that stuff, with the story of Rocket Man. But what would you say has been the biggest improvement? Because now when you think about it, and I would say even into the teens, the teens, you had guys like Cam Newton drafted, had great success in Carolina, then we know what happened with him. But now you have guys like Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, and these other guys they're standing on the building blocks of some of these other guys mentioned, like a Randall, a Michael Vick, a Warren Moon, Doug Williams, James Harris, you go down the list. So how do you think the game has improved in how they treat guys?
Well, it's changed a lot in terms of opportunity for black quarterbacks, and to me, there's sort of a seminal moment along the way. You're so right about how it didn't. It's a recent development. Again, talking about why I chose to write the book. I mean, we're 80, 90 years into the NFL, and look go back to 2010. All right, let's pick that year out. Look at the quarterback position in the NFL. What do you have there? Who are the best quarterbacks? You have Tom Brady winning the Super Bowls. All right. You have Peyton Manning. You have they're at the peak of their careers. Brett Favre is still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You have Eli Manning winning 2 Super Bowls. I mean, you start to see where I'm going here. Ben Roethlisberger comes into the league. He wins. Drew Brees. The quarterback position is still there. There had been a generation of black quarterbacks that come into the league, Vic and some guys, but at the pinnacle of the sport, it was a white position. All right. And that's who was winning the Super Bowl. Okay. Year after year. That was great that Doug Williams won in 1988. But do you know what happened for the next 20 something years? White quarterbacks won the Super Bowl. And so it had not changed enough. It was still a drop back to it, with a kind of a sweeping brush, you can say it was still a drop back white quarterback's position. I mean, that was Brady and Manning and those guys. So it finally changed. To me, what finally changed was the generation that came in. You mentioned him. Cam Newton is drafted in 2011. Colin Kaepernick is drafted in 2011. The next year, Russell Wilson is drafted, Robert Griffin III. Those guys, all right, and this is a story, by the way, that Ozzie Newsome told me. It's in the book. He said, until that point, the NFL took a good black quarterback, and said, you're going to have to do what we do in the NFL. You're going to have to drop back. You're going to have to learn how to play how we play in the NFL. With that generation of guys, they were so good, and they from the beginning, and so they brought so much to the table. The NFL finally said, you can do what you do. We're going to change, not you. We're going to change. We're going to open up our offenses. We're going to start running some of this run pass option stuff. We're going to set you in motion, let you throw on the run. You don't have to be in the pocket. We're going to change our offenses for you. And so that's the 2011, 12. I mean, Colin Kaepernick, of course, went on to become such a controversial figure and other things off the field. But boy, in the early part of his career, he was unbelievable talent. He was one of the best quarterbacks. I watched him as second year, and I thought, this guy may be better than anybody I've ever seen. He was unstoppable. He's running around, throwing, and he had the 49ers in the Super Bowl. Almost should have beaten the Ravens. They should have beaten them. So you have those guys. Then you have Russell Wilson the next year, wins the Super Bowl. Cam Newton gets the Panthers to the Super Bowl. Those guys were good. And from that point forward, is you see the quarterback position changing, and then to the point where we are today, where you see Lamar Jackson or the younger guys, even C.J. Stroud, guys that are coming into the league and are being told, you don't have to be a drop back quarterback. That's over. That's done. You can, Mahomes, even as great an arm as he has, he's mobile. When there's trouble, he can get out of it. And so the position has changed, and it's to the benefit of the black quarterbacks who help facilitate that change. And there's no going back. It's never going to be the same. You can still be a straight drop back quarterback and win the Super Bowl, but it's not the only way you have to be.
And the one name, I guess he would have been drafted 98, 99, give or take in that time period, would have been Dante Culpepper that stands out. Because he, had a unique circumstance with Dennis Green being his coach and some of the assistants and everything else like that. So besides Dante, and I guess you can dive into that a little bit, but also how much does it have to do with having black coaches and everything else involved with the game? Because as well, like you said, the game has changed. I know there's a lot here, but you had guys like Cordell Stewart where teams would not build around a talented black quarterback. And so what about that kind of thing with Cordell and Dante in a unique situation and such?
Yeah, you're picking an interesting period of time in this story because you're talking about the mid 90s, the late 90s. Cordell was 1995, I think he was drafted. Dante Culpepper is 99. Of course, Michael Vick is 2001. And the question is, yes, that was a period of time where they would, I mean, and they all had different talents. The Steelers with Cordell Stewart did give him the chance, which players with that skill set before him really didn't even have a chance to play, who were mobile. So they give the Steelers credit for that. However, you're right. They didn't really want to build around him and they moved on after a while. He had a winning record, had a good record with the Steelers. Dante Culpepper, of course, was just a prodigious talent. There have not been many guys that have thrown a better pass than Dante Culpepper. And he came into a unique situation in the NFL. He had a black head coach, a black position coach. The Vikings were pretty progressive there, and it was a good situation for him. And I write about that in the book, and he commented on it. It appeared that things had changed, but that generation sort of stalled out a little bit, and he got hurt, and Culpepper got hurt, and then again you had, just as I was referring to earlier, you had Brady and Manning and all those guys take over, and it was sort of a hiccup in the progress for black quarterbacks. Was the first decade of the 2000s. But you've hit on something big there, and that is black coaches, black general managers, people that shape the roster, and of course the NFL record there is very spotty, and that is ongoing. And having a different set of eyes on this situation would have changed things all along. You're looking at a pretty much a white power structure, coaches, or general managers, owners, team presidents. It's changing a little bit, but not enough. But that definitely slowed you just have different decision making when you have a black person like Ozzie Newsome with the Ravens, making those decisions. The Ravens from the get-go drafted black quarterbacks and brought them in sometimes as backups, sometimes as starters. There's been a lot more of that going on. Certain franchises just always had somebody that was willing to go against the grain and make those decisions. But the more black coaches and administrators you have, that changes the story dramatically.
Well, the book is Rocket Man. We want you to get the book. We could sit here and tell stories all day, but I got a couple of questions for you based on the writing career, if I may.
Sure.
So obviously you mentioned early on, grew up in Dallas. You started at the Times Herald down there. Then you made the jump to the Baltimore Sun in '84, where you paid attention to the Ravens, the Orioles, Maryland Terrapins and such. Why, after all these, yes, you worked for the Sun and went to work for the Ravens and such, but what is it about Baltimore that kept you there, you would say, besides the professional side of things?
Well, I did. I came here in 1984. I was newly married. The heyday of the newspaper business. My wife and I, we thought we'd be here for a few years. I didn't know what would happen. The Baltimore Sun gave me an opinion column, which in 1987, I was 30 years old. 1987 was really the pinnacle of the sports business. If you had your own column, so I had a good job. I mean, that had a lot to do with it. They sent me around the world. I think by the time I left the Sun, I'd been to 45 states and 11 countries, to writing about sports, it was just an incredible ticket to see the world. So the professional end of it was great. And then the personal end of it was a nice place. I enjoyed it. A nice place to raise a family. My wife and I had 2 kids, and they're now in their 30s, and they live in Baltimore, and have 2 grandkids. Everybody's here, so it just worked out. It was a good, affordable, fun place to raise a family, and we made a lot of friends, and it was just it was a nice place.
So, like you said, you've been fortunate enough to go to so many places. Just the Olympics alone, Calgary and LA and France and Norway, Australia, all that fun stuff, all these different places. Was there a particular Olympics that you really enjoyed going to, or was just great to be able to go to these different world events?
Well, my favorite world event that I covered was the 1990 World Cup in Italy. The 19 U.S. World Cup of Soccer. That year, the U.S. qualified for the first time in 40 years. And I talked my boss into sending me. And so I went, and the U.S. got knocked out right away, of course. It wasn't a very good team. And then he said, "Oh, why don't you just stay and write about all these other countries and players?" And so what an assignment. I was over there for 5 weeks covering soccer in 1990, sending back these dispatches, just went all over Italy on an expense account. I mean, come on. So that was an incredible assignment. Among the Olympics, Olympics are always really interesting. It was a great trip to Australia I took. That was really fun. It's the only time I'd been there. Certainly the Olympics in Lillehammer, Norway in 1994 stand out to me. There was a Winter Olympics. It was great. That was the one with Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. So there was a lot of drama. Plus, the Norwegians were just great hosts. I mean, it was really cold, really cold. There was no I don't think we saw a cloud for 2 weeks. The sun was out every day for about 7 hours. Then the rest of the time it was dark. But it was just a great Olympics. They were really into it, and so they would come out. You'd be there at cross country skiing event, and there'd be 100,000 people on the side of a mountain, and you're thinking, boy. I've wandered into an interesting situation here. So that's one that stands out to me.
And, what's funny is I grabbed this off the bookshelf. As far as the cold, the whiskey tends to keep you warm, but.
Yeah. Well, the Norwegians, I'm trying to remember what we had, but something.
There's usually something to help keep you warm. But back stateside, you had an opportunity, obviously, being in Baltimore, to follow Cal's career, the Ironman streak. You did a book on that as well. But what was it? And I'm obviously biased because as a fan, I grew up loving Ripken, still love Ripken. I followed his son, Ryan, through his career. What was it about Ripken that made him so special? Was it the hometown boy done good? There's just so much there. What was it from your perspective what was it about from your perspective that made Cal Ripken Jr. special?
Cal is such an interesting case. As you said, I did write a book about it. He's truly a son of baseball. I mean, his upbringing was unusual. His father was a strong personality, minor league coach, a scout. And he's just steeped in it. And so he comes into baseball as a guy that is just understands it just intuitively. So it is truly in his DNA. I mean, like literally. And so he brought that to it. And he always, what he understood and brought to the game was that everyday mentality. And it ultimately became his defining thing, of course, with the streak and all that. But his father taught him so well. You made a lousy play. You make an error. Get your butt up and make the next play. You have a bad game. Go to sleep and you got tomorrow. Practice. The more you practice, the better you'll get. So Cal to me is just that's what I've always loved about baseball, different than football, where there's so few games, each one's such a major event. And there's such, in baseball, it's really, you can have a really bad game. And then, but in the long run, if you have a lot of good games, it doesn't matter. And so the everyday mentality of baseball, just the grind of it, he understood it and lived it and just grasped it so much. So, people would say, well, what are the highlights? You wrote about Cal all those years. And yeah, there were some highlights, the 3,000th hit, the 400th home run. I was there for a lot of them. But honestly, Cal Ripken in a nutshell is the day he went 1 for 4 against the Twins on a Tuesday night in June. And that's Cal Ripken. It wasn't just crazy spectacular. It was just baseball. And so that's what I remember best about him. And, it wasn't something just dynamic and spectacular. It was just good baseball over and over and over again for so long you can't even believe it.
Well, I mentioned his son, Ryan, who's now retired. He's coaching actually with Rick Dempsey's new school down in the area. But how much pressure, and I've had a chance to talk to Ryan a little bit, over the years when he was playing and such. But how much pressure do you think it was on him? I don't think he'd ever admit it, growing up with such ilk as both Cal Sr. and Jr. as family lineage.
Oh, well, it's just unbelievable pressure. His father in particular. It's to go into that line of work, you're asking for it there because he's and that's not to say you can't succeed. It doesn't make you succeed or whatever. You can do it, but you're held to a very high standard there with that name. So it's tough, and I think he gave it his best shot. And easier, baseball's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
And he actually, I think, got as far as AAA.
He played in Norfolk a little bit.
Yeah, to his credit. But that's tough, very tough to make it. You can be a really, really great baseball player and not make it. So it's tough.
Yeah. But last two, Jordan in Utah. How unbelievable was that? Because Jordan always had that mentality, play to win, and just he grinded it out. The flu game, just there's so many different stories with him. What was that like? Being able to cover Jordan, especially at that last game?
Well, I had the worst seat in the house. I was in some auxiliary press box. I was way up somewhere. So it was I was looking down, with binoculars. But it seemed like, it was amazing. I had covered him actually as a young player. My prior stop when I was in Dallas, working at the Times-Herald, my last job was covering the Mavericks. And I was there when Jordan came into the league. So, and it was the era where the early to mid 80s, and you could walk into a locker room before a game and talk to a guy. And it was a lot better access. So I vividly remember going into the Chicago Stadium, I think it was, and talking to Michael Jordan as a rookie, just in the locker room. At the Bulls locker room before the game, and you could already tell then it's like, whoa, this guy is really something special. So then all those years later I didn't cover the NBA once I came to Baltimore, so just followed it. But at that game in particular, it was just such a winner. Such a just competitiveness of Jordan was just a sight to behold. That's what you see in some of these great athletes. It's just the competitiveness. I think of Tom Brady when he was behind. What was the score to Atlanta? What were they losing by? 28-3 or something like that.
Yeah.
In the Super Bowl. And then he completed like 50 passes to win the game. It was similar to that. It was like, well, Jordan is just not going to lose this game. And he's in Utah. They were great fans. So some guys just are like, well, I'm just not going to lose this game. And it's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, and the other one I wanted to obviously mention, I mentioned in the intro, as I sit here looking at a rare pin flag from Tiger Woods when he hit 82. But what was it? And I guess it would tie in with the book, but from golf. What was that like seeing Tiger change the game of golf?
It almost felt like it was destined. The Masters that I covered him was in 97, I believe it was. And he won by, I mean, you just felt like this is gonna happen. Almost went into I covered the Masters almost every year for the Baltimore Sun. And so many years, great golf, great event, great tournament. Of course, with its own set of issues about race. I mean, needless to say, you're in the South. There were issues about the club letting in blacks and women. And, here comes Tiger Woods and just busting all those barriers, and was just, it was, to see, a young athlete like that come in and just the sport, it just elevated the sport so much. It was just, I'm not about any of that. I'm just about playing incredible golf. No one had ever seen golf in some regards like that, how far he hit it. And just, he won by 10 shots or 12, I've forgotten. He won by a lot. It was just stunning to see such a young guy just on so many levels, just bust all preconceived notions about on and off the golf course. And you knew you were watching something that it was near the end of that century. And it was one of the moments of the century. And you knew it as it was happening. It's like, this is something amazing.
And to be able to sit in a front row seat, per se, to watch history being made for many different things, I am in awe of you, because I have a background in history as well. And to watch historic things happen up front like that is unbelievable. But the book is Rocketmen, the Black Quarterbacks Who Revolutionized Pro Football. John Eisenberg will have links to everything where you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that fun stuff. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hi, this is Buck Showalter, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.